Kathy Rickliffe, 18 years old, lived in Camberwell, Surrey, England. In 1992nd year, the girl was trained as a hairdresser at a local beauty salon. In the future, she dreamed of opening her own salon. Her colleagues were like a second family to her. She adored her job, her family, her friends. Katie was in love. She was becoming an adult. She had a life full of colors. In early May, Katie's boyfriend broke off the relationship. It was her first crush. The girl was going through a breakup hard. She only went out to work. I stopped seeing friends after my shift. Katie has withdrawn into herself, spending evenings at home alone. On the 6th of June 1992, Katie's best friend, Michelle, persuaded the girl to go out with her to a nightclub. I think that a friend needs it to heal from mental anguish. Katie was at the club until 4 in the morning. At the end of the party, the girl's plans for the continuation turned out to be different, and Katie went home alone. Kathy Rickliffe didn't come home. 14-year-olds pitched a tent in the yard of one of them. The guys imagined that in the future, they would definitely spend the night camping in distant canyons and dense forests. But so far, parents were not allowed to do this somewhere further than the yard of the house. The boys woke up in the early morning from the fact that it was pouring rain, and their temporary night shelter was not waterproof. The chilled ones didn't go into a friend's house and had breakfast. At about 8 in the morning, they went for a walk. The boys saw a naked, mutilated body lying along the concrete wall of the cemetery behind a parked car. There was a lot of blood around. This sight will haunt each of them all their lives. The police arrived at the scene of the crime. It was found that the body was dragged for several meters and then thrown against the wall of the cemetery. Most likely, the victim was initially brought by car. The police cordoned off the crime scene, and the body was taken to the forensic morgue. On the same day, it was determined that the victim was Kathy Rickliffe. The girl had documents with her. The body was found on the street of the town of Farnborough, 6 kilometers from the club where the girl was last seen. Farnborough was in the opposite direction from the girl's house. Katie was stabbed 27 times. The blade of the knife was 17 centimeters. Some of the wounds were through. The girl was not killed immediately. She was bullied. Some of the cuts were superficial to cause the deceased pain. Most of the wounds were in the area of her genitals. The victim's genitals were mutilated. The chest is riddled with deep cuts. A large amount of damage was inflicted after death. The unknown did not want to stop. No traces of sexual violence were found. One piece of jewelry was removed from Katie. Inexpensive jewelry was most likely taken from the body as a trophy. Clive Discall, the chief inspector who worked on the case, compared the killer in terms of injuries and level of cruelty with Jack the Ripper, defining the rapacity of the killer as beyond the limit. For the first time, the profile of the criminal was compiled by the English surgeon Thomas Bond back in 1888 year. Based on the information provided to him by the investigation, he described the identity of Jack the Ripper. So, in this somewhat similar murder, it was decided to involve a profiler. The expert has compiled a psychological portrait of the alleged offender. And there were quite a lot of coincidences with the work of Thomas Bond. The killer had to be a man of great physical strength. Outwardly, it appears to others as a quiet, harmless man. He has an average income. He has a physical job. Age 30-35 years. The unknown is periodically subjected to bouts of erotic mania. The nature of the injuries inflicted may indicate that a man may be subject to satyriasis. Satyriasis is a male neurotic state of uncontrolled, excessive sexual desire. Probably, the impulse to kill developed out of revenge. Perhaps problems with an erection that encourage even more hatred of women, or ordinary sexual intercourse does not bring satisfaction, is subject to perversions, sexual perversions. Despite the fact that there was no sexual contact, the crime, as determined by the expert, had a sexual motive. The police focused on the nightclub, or rather, on the male audience of this institution. The police at that time believed that the killer was a visitor to the club and chose Katie there. In 1992, there were no security cameras in the club. The investigators began their work with interrogations. Basically, it was possible to identify only the regulars of the institution. It was impossible to determine the entire list of men present that night. The small number of guests of the club, with whom they still managed to talk, did not arouse suspicion and had an alibi. The next day, Katie's ex-boyfriend, with whom they broke up a few weeks ago, was taken to the police station. A thin boy with a sparse beard was sitting in the police station, dressed in wide shorts and a t-shirt, but the detectives interrogating him had every reason to believe that the guy in their interrogation room at the police station was hiding his ugly and wild nature. The young man did not match the profiler's psychological profile at all. Moreover, he was the initiator of their separation. He was worried that Katie was taking the breakup so hard, and if one of them was burning with hatred and a desire for revenge, it definitely wouldn't be him. But here's one suspicious detail. It turned out that the guy was also in a nightclub that night. Of course, he saw his ex-girlfriend. They tried to look out for each other unnoticed. Katie left earlier, and he rested with friends until morning and spent the night at one of their houses. Katie's ex-lover had an alibi. After that, the police checked the sex offenders of this region, but it did not lead to anything. Such brutality cannot be contained for long, and the police could only wait. 2 years have passed, but there have been no similar attacks in Surrey County. Investigators began to think that the brutal killer turned out to be a guest performer, whose bloody trail most likely rushed to other lands. The identity of the killer remained unknown. At that time as before, the investigators saw in the killer a large, strong, middle-aged man obsessed with hatred of women. A fairly typical portrait will be destroyed by new facts. The massacre of Katie was committed by a 12-year-old local school girl. Exactly 2 years after Katie's murder, on June 7, 1994, at Collingwood College in Surrey, 13-year-old Anne-Marie Clifford went into the bathroom with another schoolgirl. She was standing at the sink and looking in the mirror when her classmate, 14-year-old Sharon Carr, for no reason, stabbed the girl in the back with all her might, piercing her. Anne-Marie saw a smile in the reflection. Her classmate's eyes were shining with happiness. Sharon grabbed Anne-Marie and threw her on the cold tile floor. There was so much power in her. Her hands seemed to be made of iron. Sharon stood over Anne-Maria, grinning and tossing the knife from one hand to the other. At that moment, a group of girls entered the toilet. They caught Sharon at the scene of the crime and called an ambulance and the police. Anne-Marie survived the attack, although the incident left her with psychological, physical injuries. It's amazing that no one else was hurt that day, because Sharon was tearing up with rage. Sharon Carr was sent to a medical center after her arrest. She screamed, struggled, spat, kicked. She certainly wanted to finish the job. She seemed wild. She wasn't allowed to finish, and she couldn't accept it. In the hospital, she managed to attack two employees who were trying to sedate. From there, Sharon was sent to an institution for juvenile delinquents. Sharon Louise Carr was born in Belize on December 21st, 1979th year. Belize is a small state located in Central America, which until 1981 was under the rule of Great Britain and was called British Honduras. The family in which Sharon was born was very poor, like many families in the district. She was one of 4 children from 3 different fathers. So, Sharon was raised, so to speak, by her mother and stepfather. The mother's roommate drank every day. He was a violent drunkard who, in a state of strong alcoholic intoxication, beat his cohabitant and children. For Sharon, childhood became survival. Her childhood is a constant danger on the ghetto street and endless pain and bullying from home. Sharon's mother Molly, in between the beatings of her roommate, used sophisticated punishment for her children. She burned her children's genitals with hot pepper. Sharon's mother later broke up with an alcoholic roommate and met George Carr, a soldier of the Royal Army Medical Corps who served in Belize. When Sharon was 7 years old, their whole family moved to Suroy County. Sharon was now going to a local school, getting a good education. At first, the teachers characterized the girl as a polite and helpful student. Sharon made friends among her classmates. She started going to extracurricular basketball classes. The guys said that she was a sociable and sympathetic girl. But less than a year later, Sharon began to behave much worse. She became irritable, rude, and attracted attention with obscene phrases and hostile antics. In 1990, the principal of the Cord Wales Junior School in Camberley contacted social services about the behavior of a student. Sharon was even placed in a foster family, but she wanted to return to her family, and she came home a month later. Also at this age of 11, Sharon witnessed how an enraged mother, in a fit of rage, overturned a large pot of boiling broth on her roommate. The man was writhing in pain, lying on the kitchen tile, and Sharon stood and looked down at him. Violence has become the norm for a child. The victim was hospitalized with burns, and the mother was charged with assault and sentenced to a suspended prison sentence. When Sharon started high school, her mother already had a new partner. No more attempts were made to remove Sharon from the family. Previously, the girl was afraid of everyone around, but now they were afraid of her. Classmates avoided the schoolgirl in horror, and she liked it. She had no old friends left at school. She considered fear to be the most important form of respect. Sharon found other friends to match herself. They weren't from her school. They were older than her and used drugs. At the age of 11, together with her friends' part-time accomplices, she began to steal. Sharon seemed to be afraid of nothing and no one, except her own mother. And it wasn't just that she was ruthless and cruel. She carried with her a secret knowledge. Sharon believed that her mother possessed a secret powerful force. She was a follower of the voodoo religion, but resorted to the rituals and practices of Hoodoo, North African witchcraft and religious cult. Sharon has witnessed the bloody offerings of animals more than once. The girl, watching her mother, began to sacrifice animals herself. With regularity, at least once a week, neighbors' pets began to disappear. At first, covering her sadistic tendencies with rituals, Sharon soon realized that torturing animals brings her pleasure. We're going back to 1994. Sharon Carr was sentenced to 2 years in prison for causing bodily harm to 13-year-old Anne Maria Clifford. Sharon was in custody, and even within the prison system, it turned out to be extremely difficult to cope with. She attacked other prisoners and staff several times, which led to several transfers between prisons. In September 1995, she was transferred to the Bullwood Hall Juvenile Delinquency Colony. Soon after her transfer, the staff discovered that Sharon Carr was telling the cameraman what was previously unknown about her. Probably in order to impress, Sharon told the prisoners that she had committed murder at the age of 12. Bullwood Hall staff alerted the police. Everyone in prison knew that Sharon wrote something down in a thick notebook every night. The notes made in prison, as well as old diaries seized from her house, were examined by the police. The diaries from home contained a description of the sexual arousal she experienced when she killed Kathy Rickliff. One chilling entry read, "I wish I could kill you again. I promise I would have made you suffer even more. Your screams still turn me on. Next time, it will last much longer." Sharon also wrote, "I swear I was born a murderer. Killing for me is excitement, and it lifts me up so high that I don't ever want to go down. Every night, I see the devil in my dreams, and sometimes I see him in the mirror. I understand that the devil is me." The press picked up on this revelation of the killer, and soon Sharon Carr became known as the daughter of the devil. In the years that followed, Sharon tried to return to that very night of June 7th, 1992. "I wanted to recreate my feelings so much that on the anniversary of my first committed murder, I attacked another girl with a knife again." Later, in her notebook in prison, she did not describe what happens to her every day, as many thought. Every day, after several years, she wrote down her pleasant feelings from the murder there. Every day, she considered what she had done with a girl at the age of 12 to be the best thing in her life. Sharon suffered from only one thing: bloodlust. Sharon Carr is another vivid example of homicidomania. This is an irresistible compulsive attraction to violence and murder. 4 years later, Sharon, while in prison, wrote, "I stab her in the chest. Her eyes are closed. She begs me, but I bring the knife to her again and again. I need to do this with her. I need to overcome her beauty, her serenity, her protection. I see her face, she's dying. I know she feels like her life is slowly going away. I hear her sob. The air stops in the back of her throat. I'm happy." In fact, these are the most innocuous recordings made by Sharon Carr. Her thoughts were so black that the police could not provide them to the media. On the 7th of June, it was written in her diary, "Respect to Kathy Rickliff. Today is 4 years old." Dr. Elizabeth Yardley, a criminologist, said, "The diaries of a murderer are a way to relive a murder." This is a desire to perpetuate them in memory, to be able to go back and relive the moment when he felt omnipotent. In this way, it preserves this moment. He doesn't want to forget about it, not a single detail. That's why we see such long passages written about the most horrific acts of violence. Sharon wants to enjoy it even after a few years. And of course, she would repeat it, because for her it was the best thing in her life. Sharon was questioned by the police, and unexpectedly, she readily confessed to the murder of Kathy Ratcliffe in the summer of 1992. Sharon had 3 versions of the beginning of events. The girl claimed that she was riding with her 2 friends in the car at night, and they saw Katie all alone. Katie thought she was going to get a ride home and got into the car. According to one version, realizing that the car was moving in the opposite direction, Katie jumped out of it. Sharon also jumped out on the move and chased after her. She knocked him to the ground and began her bloody massacre. The car continued its movement as if nothing had happened. According to the second version, friends raped Katie in the car and threw her on the side of the road. Sharon jumped out of the car to continue torturing Katie. But Katie didn't have intercourse that night. According to the third version, Sharon saw Katie and said she wanted them to take them both to a secluded place. At Sharon's request, she and the girl were dropped off at the cemetery on the road. Katie was still alive and unharmed. The car disappeared around the bend. Katie stayed in the woods with the girl Sharon. This is probably the most unexpected denouement in which she could find herself in these circumstances. Night. 2 strangers, a car and a girl with them, and Sharon is standing next to her now. But it was she who seemed to be a predator. Physically precocious, incredibly strong girl clutched a knife in her hand. Except the guys Sharon named had an alibi that night. Therefore, the police did not have reliable information about how Sharon and Katie ended up in that place, whether Sharon could have had accomplices. But the detectives had no doubt about what happened next. It all came down to one thing. Sharon was ready to talk about her attack endlessly. She enthusiastically described in detail each stabbing. The interrogation went on for several days and in total lasted 27 hours. 27 hours of gory details. These were detailed descriptions of the girl's tortures and tortures. Despite some inconsistencies in how she ended up where she was found, nevertheless, according to Sharon's testimony, the police were sure that she was guilty. Sharon graphically depicted the injuries and the bracelet that Katie was wearing at the time of her death. Since these details were not made public, they were considered things that only the killer could know. Sharon very willingly agreed to participate in the reconstruction of the murder. At the moment of this action, she repeatedly laughed, and the smile did not leave her face. Detective Sergeant Paul Clemens, who talked to Sharon a lot, said that it was as if she was in another world at such moments. She was filled with delight. The 4-week trial of the Devil's Daughter began at Winchester Crown Court in March 1997, almost 5 years after she killed Katie. It was the letters and subsequent oral testimony that formed the basis of the prosecution. Sharon knew about the murder information that was deliberately hidden by the police and was not available to the public. There was no forensic evidence and no direct evidence. But Sharon Carr, on March 25, 1997, was unanimously found guilty of the murder of Kathy Ratcliffe and sentenced to 14 years in prison for manslaughter because of her age and mental insanity. Katie's sister German, her mother Helen, and father Joseph were in court. Helen told the press, "It's like me and my family are serving a sentence. This monster doesn't care. Not a day goes by that I don't think about what happened. I know that there will never come a time that I can just get over it. I will take my grief to the grave." Shortly after the sentencing, Sharon was diagnosed with schizoaffective disorder. This is a psychosis that involves the presence of symptoms such as delirium, hallucinations, disorganized thinking and speech. This indicates a loss of contact with reality. On June 16, 1998, in accordance with the law on mental health, Sharon was transferred to Broadmoor, to a high-security psychiatric hospital in Crowthern, Berkshire, where a huge number of the most dangerous serial killers and maniacs were kept. There, 21-year-old Sharon Carr fell in love with another prisoner. In June 2000 of the first year, the lovers planned a wedding and even ordered rings for themselves. Sharon chose 24-year-old Robbie Lane for her future spouse. The couple met 2 years ago, naturally, in their psychiatric hospital. Since then, they had regular hour-long supervised meetings during which they were allowed to kiss and cuddle. The couple was to be married in the hospital chapel at the end of June. The ceremony was to be attended by several other prisoner patients, who became close friends of the couple. This news became known to the media and immediately appeared on the front pages. Katie's father commented on this. "She took my daughter away from me. Katie's murder 9 years ago destroyed my family. My wife and I divorced, and now she is allowed to get married, love, and live." But it wasn't meant to be. Sharon got her hands on one of the newspapers, and it was only from her that she learned what her fiancé had done. When Lane was 17, he killed his mother in a fit of jealousy. At first, he brutally beat her, believing that she loved her sister more. Then, he poked out her eyes with the handle of a carpet brush. To her, he beat her to death. He was sent to Broadmoor in 1996. After reading the article, Sharon restricted all communication with the groom. She despised him for what he had done to his mother. Sharon loved her mother more than anyone in the world. Sharon remained at Broadmoor Hospital until it became a male-only detention facility. 26 years have passed since Sharon's trial, and she still poses a danger to the British public. Despite the fact that she was sentenced to 14 years, she remains too unstable. Her behavior is unpredictable. Sharon is ready to kill without any motive. Sharon Carr is currently in a women's prison on the outskirts of Ashford, County Middlesex. She is being held in solitary confinement, and, given her unstable mental state, she is likely to remain there for the rest of her life.